Hello there. Well, we're back, and I'm out here working on something you guys haven't seen for quite a while. And it might surprise you. Show you what it is. It's the intake for my big block Ford 460. And the last time you guys saw this was probably about 2 years ago when I first started on this. Maybe 3. Time flies. So, what I wanted to point out is it's a Action Plus intake. It's a stealth intake. Originally, this intake was called an Action Plus. Then they changed the name to Stealth. I think the reason they did that is because the RPM band on an Action Plus was from like 500 to 6. And these intakes here went from 15 to 68, I believe, something like that. So the Stealth intake is where the RPM band came in, and the Action Plus was known for a smaller RPM. But they first came out with this intake. It had Action Plus on it, was the same part number, and I don't know if a lot of people would know that. But yes, it was the same intake. Now they make a Stealth and they make an Action Plus, but the Action Plus is a different intake in the small block Ford. Big block Ford, it's the same intake. So anyway, I'm doing some work to this thing. What I want to show you is that down these runners here, center runners, they have a pretty nice design as far as being open and not too squared off. Pretty straight for the most part, nothing too bad. But the end runner over here still has not a terrible design, considering that it has to bend around and all that. It has a lot of area here from the floor to the roof, where this one over here pinches way off. It closes right off back in here. It pinches off more in this area. So what I have to do is widen this, go back around in here, and take that sharp turn off, which I've done quite a bit already, because I want that air to be able to move straight as possible. When you already have all these twists and turns and an intake, and we talk about air liking to go straight, and this surely isn't going straight through a dual plane intake. It's twisting, going down, making turns, trying to go. Certain areas are pinched off more than others. Some runners will have more reversion than the other. That's where the air can't really make it through, and it wants to get turbulent, and that's never good for power. So anything we can do to straighten this out is always better. And I see a lot of guys, they test all this stuff and they use all kinds of techniques, but it comes down to this: you're only going to get so much out of a dual plane intake, and you're only going to be able to correct so much. Now, some guys will put a lot of time into doing this, and other people, they'll just do a few areas and they call it better than nothing. Something's better than nothing, that's true. I always say that. But here's what we have here. This is not terrible, even though it's not great. So I'll correct that. Like I said, take the sharp turn off. I'll even this back more than I have it right here. But down in the plenum area, I'll let you take a peek down these runners too. See, I went over this a while back and rough cut stuff in, but I never finished it. So right down in here, where it goes in on this side, I've evened this wall out down in this area here, and I'm taking that lip where it's kind of sticks out along the wall area here, and then it goes back. So I'm trying to even this wall straight, and this being thin is not intentional. This is just where I'm making the plenum how I want it to be. I'm straightening this wall out here on this side, and what I've also done is over here along where the plenum divider goes down, I've rounded that back. I wish I'd give you guys a better view, and I've raised that where the air can move under here better. That's what it does. It crosses over under the plenum right here. So I've cut this and raised it and rounded it off because that's actually sharp under there. There's a lot of work into this, a lot more than you'd ever imagine, and it's very hard to do all this work, because what you have to really do is get a piece of sandpaper, like a belt sander, and cut it and go all around these areas and bring it through the port over here and come back through here to get all these sharp edges and all up inside in here. For the most part, when you finish off, I mean, you can rough cut it in with a bit, carbide bit, along like a 6 or 8 inch bit, and get back in there best you can, but you're only going to get so far. So you have to finish off with a piece of belt sanding emery cloth or paper, whatever you want to call it. Most of the time when you buy a belt, it's usually an emery cloth type material. So you can see how much more room there is for the air to get around this plenum right here. And I'm still raising this up. When I'm finished, I'll have this cut back more here, and also up in here, up in the top of the plenum here. This has a lot of material, and it's about this thick, which I cut all back and raised this up and rounded this in here, even back in this area, back where the studs come through, has like a lot of material there. That's all gone. And these are things that you have to do if you want to make the most out of something when you're trying to make power. Now, I will say this intake, not this here intake, but another stuff that I had, it was on my friend's car back in the day, and it was out of the box. There was no work done to it. The divider, nothing was cut back. It was just out of the box, and he wanted to see how that intake would work on his engine. He had a Performer intake on his car, and he said, "Would you care if I tried your intake, the stuff?" And I said, "No, you can use it. It's brand new. I never had on anything." And back at that time, it said Action Plus on it. But it had that same part number. So that's what you go by. And that's what it's called now, the stuff. So I pushed that scenario enough, I think. But anyway, the intake on his Cougar, which was a heavy car, it was a 72 or 73 Cougar, 460 low compression engine. It ran 11s on motor, and with a shot of juice, it went right in the 1060s. And it wasn't a race car. This was a street driven vehicle that he just wanted to have some fun with. The car did really well back in the day. He beat a lot of cars. We're going back in the 90s. We're around 97, I guess it would be, somewhere in there. So anyway, that's beside the point. The point is this: the intake worked good enough to get that car to run in the 10s with nitrous. And if he had an engine that had compression and a little bit more aggressive camshaft, because he had a low profile cam in this vehicle, I mean, it wasn't crazy, it was just a nice little street cam, it would have went 10s on motor if that's what the engine had, enough camshaft and enough compression. The intake was good enough to go that fast. Now, he did have a spacer on that intake. He tried different spacers and things like that, but my point is, if you don't want to do all this crazy work that I do, the Stealth intake is a good intake. Now, for a stock 460, the stock intake with a 1-inch spacer works perfectly fine, except for the fact is it weighs about 2 tons, 50 pounds or whatever. I don't know. It's heavy. And everybody's taking one of them off the engine. When they pick that up and pull it off, they're like, good grief. I've never heard anybody not complain about how heavy the intake, the stock cast iron intake is on a 460 or 429. So, for an average guy with a truck, if you have that stock intake and you just want a little more performance, with a 1-inch open spacer on that 4-hole intake that you have, especially if you just wanted to have a nice mid-range engine and a little bit more top end, that will help. But you may have to rejet the carburetor. Now, sometimes you put a spacer on there, nobody will address that too often. You have to rejet the carburetor. It changes everything when you put a spacer on, and usually you have to jet the carburetor differently. And some people don't talk about that. But if you want to take a step up from the stock intake on a low compression engine up to around 10-to-1, somewhere in there, then the Performer intake is the one that really works great. But if you just want to say, you know what, I'm going to add compression to this engine, I don't want to buy 3 or 4 intakes, I don't want the Performer and then have to move up to the Stealth, I'm just going to go ahead and buy 1 intake, the Stealth is okay. I've had many people ask me about the Stealth intake. Is it too big? Even on a low compression engine, you can get away with it. From what I've ever seen, the Stealth intake will not kill it off on the low end. It's just that the bottom end may not be quite as good as the Performer would be. Now, here's another thing with Performer. You start doing a few things to that intake with a spacer and playing around, it will actually run on a low compression engine. It will run right with this Stealth. Now, I will say, when Tom put this intake on, the Stealth, and that was the guy with the Cougar that I was just talking about in the beginning of this video, he picked up 1/10 of a second, if I remember right, going from the Performer, Edelbrock Performer to the Stealth, weiand Stealth. So that might give somebody an idea what intake to choose. And on the money side of things, the Stealth intake's always been cheaper, more budget friendly than the Performer. I don't know why that would be. Maybe that's why you see a lot of these Stealths around. I think sometimes when you see somebody with a part, it's not always because it's the best, it's because it's what they can afford in a lot of cases. So anyway, I'm going to jump back on this thing. I'm trying to get things ready for the old 460 here. It's been a long time coming, and it's still taking me a while to get this stuff together. But I have a lot to do. So if I don't do a little bit here and a little bit there, then it's going to be a lot when I get ready to put this engine together. And then, like this intake, I would just say most likely it's good enough, it's going on the way it is. Then I feel like I cut corners when I do that. So I'd rather have the intake done the way that I want it done. Is this going to make a big difference doing this, what I'm doing right here? You might not even see this show up horsepower wise with this low compression engine I have, and that includes the heads that I did too, because the low compression and the RPM band of the engine where this thing's going to be, this stuff I'm doing is all for upper RPM, and depending on where that cam peters out at, because we degraded then a couple degrees of amps, it's probably going to be around mid 6,000s. So 65, 62, that's probably about where I'll be. And these intakes out of the box, the stealth intake out of the box is good till 6,800 RPM. So you put a spacer onto that, when it's open spacer, now you're up over 7,000 that intake is good for. So it's a good rounded intake. And yes, you can put a 4-hole spacer on this intake. I just seen a guy talk about that. You never do that, he said, put a 4-hole spacer on a dual plane. Well, we've only picked up 3 4/10 by doing that. So here we go again. We have a guy telling all you wonderful people out there that they tested that with his fancy heads laying there and his 2 dynos, and telling you guys that doesn't work, don't even waste your time. Well, I'll tell you what, for a $20 spacer or a $30 spacer, I'll take a gamble on that, and I'll try that myself. That's how I look at it, especially with a low compression engine, and you have something that doesn't make a whole lot of bottom end, and you want to put a 4-hole spacer on there. That will usually show up on a good side of things, depending on your intake and what you already have, how the plenum's designed, because some plenums are designed on the small side, so once in a while a 4-hole spacer may not help that intake out because it already needs more plenum volume. So then an open spacer will help you on that. So keep that in mind when you're making decisions like that. They sell a spacer that I've had on my channel. I've showed it numerous times at Advance and at AutoZone, and it has an insert in it, and you can change it from a 4-hole to a open spacer, and that spacer cost, well, it was like $22. It's probably close to $30, or maybe it's gone up now, but it has a red insert in it, and that thing's been wonderful. That's the one that I've modified a little bit here and there, and we went 3 or 4 times faster putting that spacer on a 302. So with a dual plane intake. So these are things I try to pass on you guys to help you understand that somebody's actually tried this stuff, and it's not just on a dyno, it's on something that's actually changed through the gears, going down the track, and it's made a difference. So anyway, guys, I'm going to jump back on this thing and try to get some of this knocked out. But like I said, this may look like it's overkill to some people, but I look at it this way. Anything I can do to make this air be less restrictive and be able to go where it wants to go, that's always going to be an improvement in my way of thinking. And I will show you this. I went through right here. That's why it says fix up here. And to remind me that I need to epoxy this. And before I'm finished, that little hole right there is going to be a little bit bigger, I'm sure. So that's from evening things out, not so much from making it bigger. This had a lot of taper to it here, and it wasn't very evened out. So when you use something to try to smooth things out and level it back, sometimes you're going to hit a casting spot that's not that thick, and I'll worry about that when the time comes. So that's where I do things that a lot of guys would not want to be able to have to fix this. So keep that in mind if you're trying to modify an intake. If you don't have the proper knowledge or epoxies to fix things like that, then don't push the envelope, especially on your cylinder heads, because you can turn a pair of good heads into junk trying to get carried away. If you have a cylinder head that already works pretty well, then don't get fancy with it. Just do the basics, do something that makes sense. Anytime you see restriction with air, and if you just correct that problem, you're probably going to be ahead of the game just by doing that. Thought I'd throw that in there. So anyway, guys, I want to thank you for checking me out here, keeping up on what I'm doing, and all your interest you guys show me and my son with what we're doing. We deeply appreciate it. So with that said, I want to say thanks again, and God bless you.